Good morning. We will be continuing part two, Drinking from the River of Light, The Life of Expression by Mark Nepo. Part two, title Being Shaped by Life. As the sea carves the mouth of every shore, as the wind bends the top of every tree, as fire makes the most stubborn of creatures let go, the forces of life carve and mold us. Every day, our will meets all that is larger than us. And that meeting wears us into a receptacle of acceptable and surrender, in which our care and expression is all that's left. This process is often hard and unrelenting, yet, in time, we are worn open like bones hollowed into flutes. And it's the life of expression moving through us that releases a music that is at once timeless and extremely personal. The songs that play through us are the basic human truths that help us live. This part of the book explores how the forces of life refine how we take in life and how we turn that life force into acts of care and expression. By diving down and coming up, we discover our voice. By drifting in the immensity, we discover the power of art. By living a making, we can unravel the riddle of a self, which is necessary because our self is the only window we have into existence. Ultimately, we are here to bear witness to the miracles and the hardships of life through the instrument that we each become. It is the livelihood that comes from bearing witness and creating that pays us with ever more life. Unraveling the self. If I am not myself, who will be? If I am only for myself, what am I? If not now, when? Rabbi Hillel. The Riddle of a Self. The quote cited by Rabbi Hillel that begins this section is perhaps the greatest haiku ever expressed. It was written in the 1st century BC, hundreds of years before the form of haiku was conceived. It captures the riddle of a self, which we all have to enter. How to be who we are every way and how not to be confined to only who we are. One, the other, one hand. We have to solidify a self from which to navigate our way through life. On the other hand, we need to fill that self with everything we are not, so we can keep growing and joining with other life while we are here. The self is a container for the portion of spirit we each are born to steward while alive. As such, a container needs to be sturdy and hollow, so that the spirit and life can move through us. If we thicken our container too much, we risk not being hollow enough for life to move through us. Then we live behind a thickened wall of self. The life of expression helps keep the container of a self hollow. In support of being who we are, E. Cummings offered this to a graduating high school class in 1955. To be nobody but yourself in a world which is doing its best, night and day, to make you everybody else means to fight the hardest battle which any human being can fight and never stop fighting. In support of opening ourselves to others, Plato said that we are born whole, but we need each other to be complete. In truth, we need each other to inhabit life fully. The wonderful poet Denis Levertov makes this freshly clear in her poem, The Secret. There, she recounts how two young girls rush to her, giddy to say that they have discovered the secret of life in a line of one of her poems. Ecstatic, they thank her and run off. But Levertov yearns to know which line in which poem. We know very little without each other, alone without the secret. Levertov blesses the two girls for their discovery and for believing that there is a secret in the first place. Essentially, we become as we go, unraveling the layers of ourself, one mask at a time, till nothing else can be removed. Then, we are who we are everywhere. Along the way, writing authentically has led me to learn about others while exploring myself and to learn about myself while exploring others. In retrieving my epic poem, Fire Without Witness, I had to tell the stories of dozens of characters, biblical and mythic. In doing so, I had to pour my own humanity into several different containers and move around in their skin, in their lives, in their conflicts and hidden loves. Through the journey of becoming other voices, I clarified my own. As I shared earlier, I fell into my cancer journey shortly after finishing Fire Without Witness. Then I was forced to be thoroughly and only myself. Then I had to face the prospect of living and dying firsthand. For through the journey of facing the one life I've been given, I discovered my kinship to all living things. This led to my autobiographical book, Inside the Miracle. Over time, I learned that when we write about ourselves deeply enough, we discover the world. And when we write about others deeply enough, we discover ourselves. It doesn't matter whether we center or we enter our explorations through the stories of others or through the story of our own life. Either way, we can arrive at truth and meaning. I have found over the years that I am in a long recurring cycle of cleaning the lens of myself by writing autobiographically so I can become others and tell their stories through fiction, history, and memoir. Then the stories of others grow who I am until I need to self express to clean my lens again, so I can continue to take in and tell the stories of others. And on it goes. Regardless of the art form that calls us, we must find the vibrant center of truth that waits beneath all names, whether by going into ourselves completely or out of ourselves completely. In this way, the life of expression is always concerned with the internal search for meaning. In this way, we are constantly writing our way into our lives and living our way into our writing. In this way, autobiography becomes a conversation between our soul and the oversoul, whether the swimming with or against the current. A fish can never be understood outside of the water it lives in, and an individual's soul can never be understood apart from the world it is born into. Before my cancer journey, I was a driven artist, but on the other side, landing in ordinary life, I had lost my creative drive. This frightened me. It took several months for me to realize that instead of being driven, I was drawn to things. The way a river rushes mightily and noisily to join the sea, my drive had given way to deeper waters, and there I found more freedom and joy. Now, I can only say that a poet's job is to follow everything that is life giving until we embody and evoke the deeper truth that holds life up. The surest way to do this is to inhabit the riddle of ourself. As the poet, essayist, and playwright Elizabeth Alexander says, you have to tell your own story simultaneously as you hear and tell the stories of others. The life of expression helps keep the container of self hollow. Love at first sight. To be a poet is to healthfully possessed with the instinct to stay authentic. In this regard, William Butler Yeats says, genius is a crisis that joins the buried self, for certain moments, to our daily mind. Much of our daily life is spent making it through that crisis. The difference between the authentic life and the hidden life is that the poet in us seeks opportunities to break through, while our hidden self distorts the task and seeks only opportunities to break from. I mentioned earlier that the crisis that started me writing was a broken heart, my first deep opportunity to break from or break through. My Dulcinea had auburn hair, lips that knew nothing but the secret of their softness. I was ruined before the glow even thinned. She, of course, left to live her life, and I began to break. In my heartache, I began to utter to myself, to speak freely at the air, and once I healed, I never stopped. It is important to affirm that this dynamic of releasing our particular genius through the living of our ordinary lives speaks to the poetry of authenticity, not just writing, but of the aliveness that is dormant and waiting to wake in everyone. If surfacing a buried self is what we are after, loving is how we get there. So let's consider love at first sight. While this can certainly happen, it is love at first true seeing that brings us alive. Despite the numbness and woundedness that tripping about the world can bring, I can see you every day for years, saying hello at the office. We find each other pleasant and cordial. But this one day, when I'm heartsick because my father is dying and you are too exhausted to keep your mask in place, we see each other deeply and freshly for the first time. And I'm stunned. I never realized it was you. Now, after all these years, we truly meet and love each other completely at first true seeing. This is how we rediscover the world and the mystery that informs the world, one true seeing at a time, as the clouds that hover over our head and heart blown aside unexpectedly. Yet, how do we take in what comes from these fresh, unpacked moments in which meaning presents itself? We do this by committing to the effort to listen, reflect, and express, which are the basic authentic steps of true perception. It helps to remember that whatever the process, it can be broken down into basic steps. When a center fielder is in a slump, his batting coach takes him aside and has him return to the basics of his swing. When in sync, the back swing, and follow through all one motion. But when faltering, the center fielder must concentrate on each component separately in order to return to his form. Because sometimes we rush our swing and don't follow through or hang too long in our backswing. Likewise, when at our best, we take in the world in a one sweet motion, listening, reflecting, and expressing in a seamless effort. But when we falter, we need to slow down and recover the individual steps. When we listen, we simply take in things as they are without processing them. When we reflect, we hold what we have seen or heard and circle it, trying to discern what it means. And when we express, we ask ourselves, how do I feel about what I have seen or heard? Often, in our fear and pain, we rush these steps into one hurried reach, making conclusions before we've had a chance to take things and reflect. The natural sequence of listening, reflecting, and expressing is tantamount to breathing. When we breathe, we inhale till we reach that still point at the top of our inhalation, where we briefly hold and then exhale. Normally, this is all one motion, but meditation helps us break down our breathing into its basic rhythms. In perceiving, we inhale by listening, reflect at a still point, and then exhale by expressing what we are feeling back into the world. To slow down and reclaim the very steps of perception lets us inhibit our authenticity, which lets us keep falling in love with everything and everyone we meet. This renders us vulnerable, malleable, and forgeable. Like someone who gasps awake after a deep sleep, we break through and wake, a day at a time, or in order to release our gifts into the world. It is love at first, true seeing that brings us alive, despite the numbness and woundedness that tripping about the world can bring. Living a making. The professional photographer takes assignment from without. The creative photographer takes assignments from within. The conflict from assignments from without versus those from within often perplexes the serious photographer. Ansel Adams. When finding my way, I came home from college to have a classic argument with my father. Over dinner the first night, I declared to him with excitement that I was a poet. I hadn't yet written anything but knew it was true. He was incredulous and frustrated and loudly asked, "How are you going to make a living?" I'm not sure where it came from in me, but I looked at him and said, "I am going to live a making." I confess that I have spent much of my life learning what that means, and it is living a making for so many years that led me to the place of true meeting that awaits under all our struggles. I have learned that making a living is tending the assignments that come from without, while living a making is tending the assignments that come from within. Making a living is how we survive, but living a making is how we thrive. We need the strength and resilience to do both. There is always a tension between surviving and thriving, between the assignments that come from without and the assignments that come from within, and in between making a living and living a making. Part of the journey of individuation is withstanding the tension of both until they work hand in hand. Recently, I received a heartfelt email from my godson, Eli. As a young artist finding his way, he asked me the very question I asked when I was his age. Though I have no answers, I was touched what he asked. I emailed him back, sharing my wondering along the way about the tensions of being an artist in the world. Dear Eli, your questions about living a creative life raise issues I have wrestled with my entire life. To begin with, I have always known from the time I was your age that a creative force lived in me, fueled me, and shaped me. I knew that in order for me to be who I was put here to be, I needed to stay committed and devoted to that call. And so, I have always respected the challenge of being a parent, vowing to only bring a child into this world. If I could be completely committed to that child's life, I feared I would either be a bad parent, unable to veer from my creative force enough to be there for that child, or that my love of such a child would keep me from living out my creative call. Ultimately, out of respect for what is required, I have always been clear that I didn't want to have children. Some along the way have thought me selfish for being so devoted, but this creative force is how I breathe. If I don't honor it, a part of me will die. Only you can know how essential this creative force is in you. On the other beautiful side of this is your dear father, my oldest friend, really my brother. He and your mother have brought you and your dear brother and sister into the world so lovingly, so devotedly. We wouldn't be having this conversation without the commitment of their love. And I'm grateful the three of you are here. I held you the day you were born and sensed what a gentle soul you are, even then. And throughout your life, your father has remained devoted to his art. This raises something that I have only learned after many years of wrestling with the creative force, no matter how it shows itself. That is, we are most alive and happiest while loving and creating, continually shaped by the total involvement. I started out deeply committed, hoping to write maybe one or two great poems along the way. Yet, when I had cancer in my 30s, and your father helped save my life, and I his, from alcoholism, I began to discover that living is the original art. I can only conclude that living wholeheartedly while holding nothing back will bring you into a beautifully charged relationship with living your art and the art of living. Two more parenting examples are Picasso and the great poet William Carlos Williams. While Picasso couldn't help but follow his enormous gift, he littered Europe with children conceived by many different partners, children he seldom had contact with. This has always served as a spectator of the kind of parent I never wanted to be. On the other hand of spectrum, the amazing William Carlos Williams became a pediatrician so he could make a living without having to depend on his poetry to make money. He also became a doctor so he could stay close to the pulse of life and death, which he knew would inform his poetry. In time, he had 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter. Honestly, it can be done either way. There is no wrong path. The most important thing is to know yourself, your creative force, and your nature as intimately as possible so you can make the choices that are most integral with your true nature. I also want to speak of my lifelong struggle to be in a balanced and healthy relationship with my creative force. You are young, and I believe exactly where you need to be, exploring your devotion to what brings you alive, to see where that takes you, to see how it shapes you. In time, you will see if those who love you can recognize and support that this creative force is a part of who you are. In time, you will see if they can welcome your creativity in whatever life you might build together. When your age, I was a driven artist, almost to a fault. For the creative force, if allowed, will use us up, as it did Van Gogh. I have discovered, after soaring and sputtering again and again, that the only way to be healthy in a relationship with our creative force is to integrate it with our life in the world. When your father and I were few years on the other side of my cancer and his active drinking, we were eating lunch one sober summer day in downtown Albany, both of us with hands numb from neurotherapy, me from the chemo and endured, and your father from the advanced stages of alcoholism he suffered. It was a beautiful day, and we ate our sandwiches in the sun. Out of our silence, your dad said to me, I'm an alcoholic, but you're makeaholic. I was stunned at the truth of this. For anything ever, even our creativity can become an addiction. Ever since, I have been aware and respectful of the need to have balance and the love of others in my life. It's humbling and inspiring that no matter how many years I've been devoted to the craft of perception, and wake every day with a sense of starting over and a yearning to get as close to the pulse of life as possible. And I admit that whether aware of it or not, I write about what I need to draw my soul into the world. So, my books are my teachers. Once I understood this, I found more joy in writing. Now, I welcome this vast unknowing. Each book leads to the next. Questions unravel into deeper questions. And here I am, following one question to the next, book after book. The truth is that I barely understand half of what comes through me. The other half leads me. Still, I know if I give myself over to the creative force, it will use me up. It's my heart that keeps me here in the world, and the creative force rushing through my heart is what makes any of what you might read. All this to say, only you have the wisdom, waiting like a seed inside your heart, and your conversation with life will reveal that personal wisdom to you in time. The only oracle to consult is what feels ultimately true for you in any given moment. All this to say, the more you trust your heart and stay in conversation with life, the more deeply life will speak to you as you live. And when you feel overwhelmed, remember that your heart is stronger and larger than any one feeling it may experience. Honestly, I'm just sharing where life has taken me, and my path may not be yours, but I can affirm that you are not crazy and that as a creative soul, you're in a noble lineage. It is fine to be driven and fine to be drawn and fine to struggle with these things. What else we would do? Please know that I feel blessed to have you in my life. My love, Mark. Making a living is how we survive, but living a making is how we thrive. We need the strength and resilience to do both. Thank you for listening.